everybody. Welcome to another weekly webinar here at Route Consultant focused on the bread industry. My name is Josh Gregory. I lead our education team here at Route Consultant. And all that means for you is that I'm here to help teach you about this industry and make sure that any questions you have as you're trying to figure out if this is the right space for you, that myself and my team are here to answer it for you and really help you accelerate your journey into the space if you do decide that it's the right fit for you. Now, if you are here live, you're not watching on YouTube later, we will have a Q&A at the end. So if anything comes up today, or if there's any questions that have been lingering in your mind about the space, we will have an open Q&A. So feel free to ask those of us. You can even type it in while I'm talking, and we'll get to it at the end. Importantly, just so you know how it'll work, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the window. So if you want to type it in there, just go ahead and at any point type in your question while I'm talking. And like I said, we'll get to the Q&A at the end. But the way the format of today will work is before we get to the Q&A, we're going to go over some content, some things that we want you to know this week. And our focus this week is on a topic that's really critical regardless of the type of business that you're running. And that's about how to build the right culture. It is so important for keeping your business healthy, for keeping your drivers happy, and attracting new hires to the business. And we're going to talk through all of that today. And of course, we've brought Stephen Ryan back on to help share his expertise here. If this is your first time watching or your first time here live and you haven't met Stephen, he is a current contractor in the bread and grocery space with over a decade of experience at a few different bakeries and operating his own routes, growing it to the point where he has employees. So we always find it a pleasure to bring Stephen on. So Stephen, if you want to go ahead and come on live and say hello.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back with you.
Perfect. All right, Stephen. So like I said, really we're focused on kind of thinking about culture and how you build it in this industry. So, maybe take a little bit of a time travel journey back and think about when you were first really trying to think about how to build a culture for this business. So did it just happen instinctively or is it something you stumbled into, or did you ever actually kind of sit and think about what you wanted the culture to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, being in a truck, you have lots of time to think and ponder and listen to audiobooks and really dig into the business. So, over the first 5 years while I was learning the business, this was, of course, before we had webinars and places that we could go for information and to be able to share our expertise with other contractors. We had to learn it ourselves, and there was a lot to learn. And so as I got familiar with the grocery business, there was really a lot that attracted me to it. Obviously, the self-starter nature of it, the consistent growth, having your own, having control of your own destiny is huge, in the grocery space. You have a customer that's brought directly to your shelf, and if you go out and execute, you're going to grow. But thinking about culture, there were some challenges with that too. As an owner operator, probably much like most people, you're the only person, right? So you're a one-stop shop, and it's hard to really take some time off. It's hard to leave. It's hard to take vacation. And I knew that down the road, I really wanted to solve that. And so thinking through bringing on employees, thinking about the value that I could bring, and also, how I could serve an employee well. Some audiobooks really stand out in my mind. One in particular, The Go-Giver. It's a great short read. It's a story type book, and it really kind of highlights 5 laws that I've kind of implemented in my business that really served our guys well. So the law of value, how can I bring value to you as an employee? How can I serve you well? The law of compensation, so finding a structure that's fair, something that serves them well. And again, in the bread space, you have a lot of flexibility. You don't have to W-2 guys. You can use 1099 contractors. That's a little different than some of logistics businesses you might be familiar with. And then the law of authenticity, right? So being able to be in front of your employees, to value them, to show them with your posture, your cadence. You go a lot farther giving someone a cash bonus, shaking their hand, thanking them so much than an extra $250 in a W-2 paycheck. And then, of course, the law of reciprocity, right? So knowing that the more I serve you, that posture is going to come back to me, and you're going to have retention with your employees. You're going to have great satisfaction, and you're going to have a great relationship with all the bakeries you work with.
Perfect. Yeah, and so was there anything else there that you wanted to add, or was that I didn't want to cut you off?
Oh, that was it. Sorry.
Perfect. So we'll come back to the employee side of the equation, but I know a lot of bread route operators don't have any drivers, or at least don't start with an extra driver. So is culture still something that you think is important, even if it's just you? And how do you think about creating or continuing to reaffirm it if the business is really just you for a period of time?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great starting point. And really thinking about, reputation. Reputation matters, and that's how you deal with problems, and also how you deal with successes. So taking responsibility for mistakes. If you mess up, don't be someone that gives lots of excuses to a grocery manager. I have done that. I have failed. When you are the problem in front of them and you are giving them excuses on why you are the problem, you just don't get anywhere. Kind of a military culture response: no excuses, sir. And someone can really they can get behind that. Someone that's honest and can stand up for their mistakes. Be a team player. If you have extra time in the depot and there's a guy behind, help him pick his order. So go the extra mile. Always have your eyes open on how you can serve the other guys, even if they don't work for you. And then, of course, operating your business with integrity. That's huge. The Bible says, no matter what you do, do it unto the Lord. And so whether that's running a bread route or picking up trash, we have a job to do, but our reputation matters, and how you do that really matters.
Yeah, I think that's huge for thinking through because early on, your culture is really the aura, the reputation that you create that people see in you. And so that's going to have a big impact as you're bringing on employees because they are inheriting your reputation. So as you kind of really intentionally set about creating and thinking about for yourself as you're starting one of these businesses, you may only be one employee at the beginning, but it's really important to already start to think about some of these things that Steven's already talking about for the kind of company that you want to be, what you want to be known as, and to the point that you're able to communicate it, not just to grocery managers, but to the eventual employees that you bring on. So one of the things we always talk about is like understanding your why and the why for why you're running these businesses. And so how do you kind of communicate that to drivers? And do you think it's important as you bring them on?
Yeah, absolutely. And having some time in front of somebody and treating them on a personal level, aside from just an employee-employer relationship, that goes a long way. You get some time to observe their posture and, is there something dragging them down? Can you ask some personal questions if you have their relationship, and try and either offer advice or just a friendly ear to listen, because we're all in this together. The grocery space is busy. It never ends. We work around the holidays. It's always growing, and that can really drag a guy down after years. And so, like we've said before, when it's 3 in the morning and it's cold and you're in the back of the truck, you got to know your why and why you're here. And there are a lot of people that can maybe offer more money, or a different job, but you're never going to find someone. I try to put myself in a position where you're never going to find someone that is going to appreciate you more than I do here in this business. So that's kind of a great start in knowing their why and then tailoring your approach to serve them well.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to know what they care about, why they're there, and being able to speak to them and appreciate them in those ways. And I think it's also just as important to kind of explain to your drivers why you're running the business and help them understand your background and have that kind of personal connection in this space. Because, just like you're saying at 3 a.m., or, they wake up at 1 a.m. knowing they have to be at work in an hour, it's a lot easier to say, to call out and say that you can't make it if it's a really impersonal connection where you don't really know your boss or your owner very well. You don't understand why they're doing it. You're just thinking about the dollars, as opposed to kind of a more personal relationship there where you've kind of, there's a mutual respect that I think can go a really long ways. And it starts with that culture and the reputation that you're building, both in the terminal and outside of it, and the things that you can develop with those drivers. Now, I think we've hit on this before, but do you think, even if you aren't running the route, how much of culture do you think comes from physical presence, actually being at the terminal and speaking with employees in person?
Yeah, sure. That really varies. It depends on how long they've been tenured with you. It depends on if they have any experience in the business. There's a lot to learn. And so after you've built that relationship, the FaceTime is a little bit less important than right off the gate. It's easy to become overwhelmed, and if you don't have any skin in the game, you're not an owner. It's a lot easier to quit, than for someone that is an owner operator and you have lots of money invested in this and it's your baby. There's some retention there that the company gets out of a owner operator that isn't present in an employee relationship. And so having that from the start sets you up down the road when you can have a couple weeks away, when you can do these things from a phone call, when you can check in and it's football season, and his son is playing little league, and every Friday night they play, and so maybe he's a little bit behind on Saturday. How can I solve that problem? How can I serve him well in this small season? It allows you to have some flexibility and serve the guys well.
Yeah, and that brings me to something we've talked. We always in kind of emphasized in our own business when we were talking about drivers and operation side of, there you basically are wanting to make deposits in that relationship that fill up that bank where over, you're appreciating them, you're doing little things for them to understand that there's respect there where you're making those deposits so that when the time comes when you need to call on them for a favor or you need to ask a little extra, that you've built up there so you can make a withdrawal. And it's a lot easier to understand, once there's a mutual relationship, that these things happen and that they kind of are willing to jump in and help you out when they know that you also have their back. And I think you're right, especially early on. There's a huge benefit to being able to actually spend some time in person with these drivers as opposed to it being purely phone call. But once you've built that up, you can be a little bit more remote from that perspective. Now, are there any types of daily things that you would recommend to be doing to help foster the culture?
Keeping up with promotions, we've talked about this a lot. Ordering calendars, making sure no one falls behind on orders. You want to make sure you're adjusting your orders. So if you get heavy or light on product, no matter where you are fluctuation wise in the weekly sales cycle, that's really important. We've talked about that before. Checking in. Either with a district manager, with a depot manager, with an employee. That's a great thing to do on a weekly basis if you haven't heard from them. Oftentimes in the grocery business, no news is good news, out of sight, out of mind. But just, having them know that you care and I haven't heard from you in a little while. Is there anything I can do differently? How can I serve you better? Whether it's the employee or the district manager, that goes a long way. And that doesn't take a whole lot.
And so for employees, drivers that are, that you're not actually running the route, you're counting on them to run it. How often do you find that is necessary for you to check in? Not to see if they're doing their job right, but just from a like, check in and see how they're doing type of thing. How often do you check in?
I like to be pretty involved, so I see my guys pretty much weekly, and that may only be 30 minutes. That may be as I'm passing in the store, checking on something. I might be shopping personally and I see them in there. Um, but at least once a week, in my experience, that's what I do as I run this business.
Got it. So, inevitably there are going to be times where they're either employee generated or it even can come from you, but if issues come up in the culture, what do you do to try to identify those and deal with them before they become bigger issues?
Yeah, so take some time, right? So when you hear of some problems, don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Digest it, internalize it, think about it. Is this a big problem? Is this a tier one issue? Is this a tier two issue? Part of the value that I bring as a business owner is, there's a point of separation between myself, the employee, and the bakery and the grocery managers and all these people that can really be waving some red flags, and demanding attention. And so if an employee is constantly bombarded with that, um, they may not be interested in it. They if they want that problem, they may want to own their own route. but as an employee, you bring some value there that you can sift through that. Is this a big problem? Do I need to have a discussion about it? Is this a small problem? Can I sort of let it go? But starting with, asking some questions, is there anything I can do differently to solve this problem? I can remember years ago, when I worked for a company, this was back in Maryland before I owned a route. I would drive 1 hour in the opposite direction to pick up the truck and load it, and then drive an hour the other direction right past my house to go run the route. And no one thought to ask, that would really serve this guy well if at the end of the day he was allowed to just drop the truck off at home and not drive right past, his house. Needless to say, I did not last long in that business, and moved on to the owner operator side. But being observant of those things, is there anything I can do to change how I'm running this business to serve the guy better? And then we start to escalate from there. And so if there is something that we need to work on, having a discussion in person, and then further down the road, being a little bit more direct. I need this to change if we're going to continue this relationship. And if you have that progression, typically you can avoid getting to that last resort.
Yeah, and when you kind of get to that point where it's a more serious conversation, is there like a three strike policy you implement, or is there a point where you give them, you got a week to turn it around, or do you just find that if you've had a couple conversations and nothing's improved, that's the end of it? How do you typically handle those?
It depends on the guy. So I kind of have some, when you have relationships with someone, what's going on in their lives. Can you overlook some things temporarily because they're going through some challenges? Or are these ongoing issues and we need to resolve these? We need to resolve these quickly. If you have an honest, hardworking, and loyal employee, I would do everything I can to work out the problem either on my own or with him before I move into a termination. So it depends on the employee, and I would really, gauge the importance of them in your organization.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, that example you just gave earlier of, the truck that you had to go an hour out of your way to come back. I'm sure you were very dissatisfied in that job, and what a good owner can understand is that sometimes there are things that you can fix that aren't the most evident issue. Like they may just have seen you as a driver that was unhappy, and that realizing that there are things that potentially you could proactively change in their day to day, even if they don't bring it to you, because not every employee is going to bring the exact problem and ask you to fix it. Ideally, that would be the case. They have, they can self-identify exactly what the problem is and they bring it to you, you work it through, and it's always resolved just as cleanly as that. But that's not always going to be the case. And sometimes there may be an evident problem, but the real ways to fix it is that, there are some underlying things that if you can find ways to solve in your business or to work through with that employee, you can solve maybe what seemed like the real problem, but was made up of a combination of some underlying things, and ideally fix those things before it gets to the point where, yeah, you have to have a formal conversation or even fire them. And especially if they're a really good employee that you don't want to lose, it's worth spending that extra time thinking through it. So just as a last point here, it's not the case for all industries, but have you seen either yourself or have you seen other operators in the bread route space ever use actual formal employee handbooks or employee agreements that they sign early on?
So I haven't personally seen that unless you're operating in a 1099 model. So if you're using someone as a contractor, they're representing your business, they're bringing their own truck or trailer, and you're paying them a commission to do that, I would absolutely make sure that you have a really clean and clear-cut contract or handbook with them so that if you start running into challenges and you're getting breach of contract notices, you can quickly terminate that relationship before it gets any worse. So it's a lot easier to deal with that as a W-2 employee. Certainly, there's great value in having a handbook and maybe a resolution tree. If the truck breaks down, I call this number. If I run out of product, this is my first resort. There's value in that. It depends on the size of your organization, of course. And I mean, Route Consultant is a great partner in that, and all your expertise with the FedEx space and having employee handbooks. If that's something you desire, I know that that's easy to create here.
Yeah, and like Steven said, it's definitely something we can help with if you need it. We've always found, so one, an employee handbook is often a good way to help formalize and think through some of the policies that you want to implement and want to make sure your drivers are really aware of. And that can help with the culture of kind of setting these standards and things that you expect of them and that they should expect of you as well, and give kind of that common ground. There's also, depending on the states, there's a lot of things that you probably want to have in there to protect yourself, and lay out your discipline process so that, if you do let a driver go and that driver complains and says that it was an unlawful firing, that you can kind of point back to the employee handbook and show how you followed set procedures. So there's lots of things that I can talk all day about it, reasons that it's important, and regardless of the business, that we would recommend having something like this. And like Steven said, we can always help you draft something if that's something you want to implement in your own business. So I think that's kind of the end of what I wanted to talk about. Culture's really important, and even in an industry where you may only have one employee or zero employees, that reputation that you build and what you're implementing in your organization is going to matter. Even if you stay zero employees forever, that reputation and the culture that you build cements how the grocery chains, your depot manager, all think about you, and it can impact your revenue and how you're seen in the space. But as you bring on more employees, what you've already built from a culture perspective dictates how those new employees are going to see and how whether or not they're going to even come and work for you. That better, stronger culture and reputation will allow you to find employees more easily who will stay with you longer. And so all kinds of reasons to emphasize this and make it an important part of your business as you're building it out and thinking through these things, especially early on. It's something, if you can set in stone before you get started, then you've got it in place as you continue to move forward. So, like I said, that's it for what I wanted to cover from a culture perspective. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A at the bottom. If not, just a couple of reminders that I want to give out. One, if this is your first time and you're still trying to learn a lot about the space, we do these webinars every week. And so we have months of these backdated. They're on our YouTube page. You can go and watch all of these weekly webinars. We also have both a one-on-one, or we have a one-on-one that's free on our website. And from there, if you kind of pass that point of the entry-level questions, we have both summits that are digital and include workshops in person where you can come learn, meet my team, meet Steven, ask those kind of remaining questions that you have to really decide if this is the right space for you. And then if you do decide that it is, and you want to partner with Steven and really have him as a mentor to learn and accelerate your journey, we have ways of doing all of that as well. So wherever your questions lie there, feel free to reach out to our team, info@routeconsultant.com. We can get you in the right place, answer your questions. But we would always, like we said, meeting in person has a big impact. So we would love to meet any of you in person at our offices in Nashville, or another opportunity is coming in the first week of August is our big expo that we hold every year. And so regardless of the logistics space you're in, if you're interested in Brad or any other, we'll be there in person. It's in Dallas this year. So that's free to attend as well. You just have to register on our website. So I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So like I said, plenty of ways you can reach out to us and engage with us, but I will end it here for now. So Steven, thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge on all this.
Thank you, Josh. We'll see you guys next week.
And thanks everybody for joining. We will, just like Steven said, we will see you next week.